Today, I want to give you the reasons behind the changes of overpaint I did of Patreon's piece. This is the overpaint itself, and this is the Patreon's original. Okay. At the end of this video, you will find time lapse in which you will see the process of the changes. And in this section, I just want to focus on the theory behind those changes. Okay. Um, let's start. In the original, one of the first things I noticed is that there was not a value hierarchy. Okay, there was not an indication that the values were dependent from a light source. In this case, the scene, the environment is outside, and the main source light should be the sun. Okay, so I use that to kickstart the overpay, and I right away I established two main sections. One will be the ground plane, which will be almost totally perpendicular to the light source. You can see that you can oversimplify that ground into a single big plane in which most of the light will be catch. Okay, the mountains are mostly in shadow because they are parallel. Some section of those mountains would catch light. As you can see in the notes, you can use your um, your taste to use some planes and indicate that the light is catching, is falling in those planes, and design some interesting shapes for the mountains. Okay, but in general, those mountains should be mostly darker than the ground plane. Okay, that will be the value hierarchy in regards to the background. Later, I will explain the value hierarchy in regards to the character that follows the same theory. Okay. Um, Another thing. Right now, I am just talking about the background. Another thing that I noticed about the background in the original was that the contrast was not as it should be. For example, in the far section, you will notice that the contrast is very high. You have a very dark value on the mountains, and you have a very bright value on the sky. And this is because the original is not following, is not trying to mimic the atmospheric perspective that you will notice in nature when you look far into the horizon. You will notice that the details, mountains, environment that are far, far away will be very low contrast. It will be so much low contrast that the color of those environments that are far away will start to fuse with the sky. Okay, you will notice that in the overpin, those far elements are almost of the color of the sky, hence the low contrast. So based on that, I established three sections. Uh, this one that I was showing you was the far section. There will be a middle one that will serve as a transition between the far and the near section. And this is a fake ring light. Okay. And as I was telling you, this is like a transition towards the near section that is everything else. That way, you establish some order, you establish hierarchy. We have a hierarchy based on values. There is another one based on the contrast. And that's because we're trying to mimic the atmospheric perspective that you will notice in real life. Okay. And finally, in regards to the background, we have another way to establish order. This order will place the background behind the character. And that one is the saturation. In the original, as you can see, the saturation of the character and the background is basically the same. Both are very high saturated. And in the overpaint, I made a point to make the background noticeable, desaturated in comparison to the character. Okay. I will try to desaturate it even more. So you will start to notice how the character starts to come forward in a way. You can see that change between 50 normal saturation and lowering that saturation. And I could go further, but it will start to look weird. I am not telling you that this is a fixed role. You will have to use your taste, your eyes as an artist to establish what looks okay to you. Okay, for me, this is too grayish. Okay, but this one is, in comparison to the original, of course, is noticeable more desaturated, but not to the point that the background starts to matter considerably less. Okay, it's a nice balance that puts the background behind the character. So we have a hierarchy of values, hierarchy of contrast, hierarchy of saturation, and you are start to establish an order with those 3 points. So now we are going to move towards the character. Just like the background, we need to establish a value hierarchy. You can see that in the original, it was not very apparent where the light was coming from. You can make the argument that it might have come from the front. And I think my patron says something that he was trying to do that from the start, but then change it to now there is seeing. And I think that's part of the discrepancy between the environment and the apparent lining of the character, okay? So I try to match the background by identifying those planes that are facing upward that will catch light in this light scenario. I did that separation by using a color dodge layer, picked the local color, and started to paint on those facing upward layers. You can see that in the replay. I'm going to play it briefly here. And right here, you can see that separation is start to become more apparent, okay? And to be more precise, you can see that the the part that is facing upwards, was catching lights, except for that part where there is a drop shadow. I am going to talk about those drop shadows later. The top of the shoulder, the breast, the lower abs, the forearm, the medial side of the thigh, the medial side of the leg. And just to recall that a bit briefly here, the medial side is that is facing inwards the body, and the lateral side is what is facing outwards the body. Okay, so that's why I call these planes medial. This is the medial side of the leg, the thigh, and the medial side of the leg. Okay. And the lower leg, the lower right leg, the right forearm a bit. And yeah, that's basically it, the pubic area too. Forgot that. But yeah, you get the idea. Those are the planes that are facing upwards. And I separated them using color dodge layer. You can use a normal layer, you can use add layer, you can use curves. The point is to create a differentiation. You are free to do that differentiation in the way that you feel more comfortable. The point is that it has to be clear to the viewer towards a contrast difference that those planes are catching light. That's the whole point. It doesn't matter how you do it, okay? Another thing that is related to the lining and the value hierarchy are the drop shadows. Okay, you can see a bit of that drop shadow here in the original, but there are many more. Okay, I like to start rendering, identifying drop shadows, and after that, I try to group those shadows as much as possible. You can group several drop shadows into a big shadow shape, and you can also fuse those drop shadows with form shadows, okay? I'm going to explain that here with the breast. Okay, with the breast, you will notice that there is a top uh, piece of clothing here that is casting a drop shadow. And it's called a drop shadow because it's being casted by another object to fall into on other object. That's why it's called a drop shadow, and it's being fused with the drop shadow of the breast, both breasts. Okay, and not only that, you can see that this is a shape that is conformed by a formed shadow of the mid torso, and what results is a big shadow shape. That creates a sense of cohesion. That's why maybe some of you will recall that some people advise to avoid island of shadows. This is based on that. This is doing the opposite of creating islands of shadows. You are creating big shadow shapes. You can notice that here, for example, in the arm. This is the form shadow of the arm, and this is the drop shadow of the arm that is falling into the forearm. It's creating a single shadow shape. Form shadows are those shadows that are produced by the turning of the planes, okay? Drop shadows, as I explained it before, are those shadows that are being casted by another object onto a secondary object. Another advantage of drop shadows, and that's why they are very important, they are very foundational, is that they do two other things. They give weight to the casting object, and they give you topology on the object they are being casted on. Okay, you can see that on the head. The shadow that is being casted on the neck gives weight to the head and is also describing the neck. And those two purposes are being fulfilled by a single drop shadow. You can notice that in the breast, for example. It describes how the torso is barrel-like, is moving here like a barrel. And that's another very useful thing with drop shadows, okay? Let's move to another item, the gesture. In the original, I noticed that the gesture was a bit stiff. It's obvious that she's sitting, but there is a gestural line that should be there that is not being implemented. And you can see that on my notes. That gestural line basically fuses the whole body and moves everything dependent from the spine, okay? And in case it's not very visible, let me move this layer here and show you how foundational that spine gestural line is. It's not strictly just the spine. Obviously, you can see that comprises the head, it comprises the cap, and in other pieces, I also keep that gestural line from border to border, because the point is to make everything feel like a unity, okay? That's why it's very important to keep your gestural line very organic, very curvy. Let's see what else. Another thing that's very apparent when you see the original versus the overpaint is that the original has many inner lines. The problem with the inner lines when you are rendering like this is that the inner lines start to form another function, okay? That function is to be a placeholder for occlusion shadows. Occlusion shadows are those shadows that are formed when two planes are very close to each other, okay? You can see that in the clavicle, for example, in the neck, in the features of the face, like the mouth. And I will advise you that if you reach the rendering stage and something is feeling off, that you check that you have removed most of your inner shadows and replace them with occlusion shadows, okay? For example, in the overpaint, you will notice that the face is very different. The face is comprised by shapes of color. And there are some fears that will be categorized as lines, but they are serving another function. Like here, for example, this is the notch of the mouth. And the lines are very minimal here, are used very sparingly, okay? Let's compare. Even the navel is not a line, it's a shadow shape. And that's why I mean that you should try to see lines in this stage, at least, as a placeholder for occlusion shadows, okay? The limbs, there is a point I wanted to talk about because it's obviously very foundational. You can see that here, for example, if I locate the top of my shoulder and try to figure the length of the arm, that arm is going to look very long, more long than it should be. And to avoid this is it's necessary to you memorize some landmarks. For example, with the arm, you should check that once you have identified the top of your shoulder where the arm starts, the elbow should align right with the last rib here, for example. That will give you a control aspect, a control length, a length that is proportional to your torso, because you are relating that arm with the torso, and hence you are creating a more cohesive unity. In the other side, where we had the problem, the elbow is being obscured by the forearm. Okay, you are not going to see the elbow. The elbow is not here. That's the contour of the shape of the forearm. The elbow is totally overlapped by the forearm. So if we trace back, we fall into the same range. We fall into the alignment of the elbow with the last rib. And another thing that was a bit less off, but was still off, was the length of the of her left leg. Okay, same way I control the arm, the length of the arm. You should control the length of the leg by memorizing landmarks. In this case, the landmark that you need to memorize is that once you have identified your knee, and here's my knee, this is the origin of the leg. The end of that leg will be the heel, obviously, right? But where that heel falls should be the ischium. The ischium is the alignment of your heel. And you might think, what's the ischium? The ischium is that bone that is part of the waist bone group. You can identify that by kneeling. If you kneel and you put the heel under your butt, you will feel that there is a hard surface, which is your heel, obviously, that is touching another hard surface, and that's your ischium bone. Okay? In this case, the ischium bone is around here because this is my iliac crest. And once I have my iliac crest, I can trace my pubic bone. And roughly behind that pubic bone is where the ischium is. Okay, that's why I am using that box shape to find the ischium. Don't worry too much, a bit too precise. As long as you are in the ballpark, you are good. Okay. Let's see what else. Basically, there is something very important. Sorry. Note that I was talking about the waist. There was a mistake that was noticeable in the original, that the waist was parallel to the rib cage, but that does not correspond with the sitting pose. That cannot be that the waist, in this case at least, where the body is slouching. Okay, the waist should start to be more horizontal. And you can see that there is a disconnection with the thighs. The thighs are like disconnected from the waist. So to fix that, in the overpin, you can see that I moved the iliac crest lower, and I made everything more horizontal. And you have a more connected leg to the waist, okay? You can see that here also in the contour is very noticeable because we have a Y line. That's why that's how I call that kind of overlap. You can see that the waist is by that Y line is being indicated as being in front of the torso, and you will see that's missing in the original. In the original, if we focus on that section, you will notice that there is an overlap, but that overlap is mostly parallel. And in the overpin, That overlap is indicating a perpendicular angle. Okay. Let's bring the notes. Okay. The foot it should be more characteristic. It should have a C gestural line that is moving, that is curving outward. Also, the big toe should be aligned vertically with the heel. Okay, that's a perfect vertical line, and that's how you keep the foot characteristic. Obviously, you have to bump up the saturation of the toes, are more saturated. This section is also a bit saturated, but not as saturated as the toes. And the heel area is very saturated too. This place, because it's not touching the ground, it has a lighter value. Okay. As the note said, also try to create visual interest. And by that, you can use some details to break off the contour, to not make the contour too samey. And that's the reason why these straps are breaking from the leg. It's also serves you to make things look more organic and create a sense of rhythm. Okay, you can see that there is another gestural line here, for example, and that peaks here and moves outwards here. That indicates perspective too. Okay, I think that's it. I hope this review was helpful for you. And if you are interested in me reviewing your work, I offer this service for certain patrons. You will find that the URL to my Patreon in the description, and you will have to subscribe to the critic tier, and you will also be granted access to all my other rewards. You can bring works every week, and I will review them. That review will include a PSD that includes the overview, the notes, and a time-lapse video. Okay. For some works I identified that are safe for work, I asked the patron if he or she is okay with me sharing an expanded review that is voiceover, that is this one. And that's totally optional. You can opt out from having a public voiceover video, but I will always grant you the process video, the time lapse. Obviously, that's included with the review. This one is optional. I know some people are very sensitive about sharing this kind of reviews. It's not about putting you on blast, if that helps. It's about to help others. And it also helps me to do a bit of marketing for this service. So it's a win-win scenario, because with this kind of reviews, you get a more expanded explanation that does not quite, cannot be conveyed through notes, okay? And yeah, I think that's it. I hope this was helpful, and see you later. Bye.